event is about a budget response. As everyone's aware, the federal government handed down its budget last night, and while a lot of people will have various views on that, obviously one of those that I consider the most important response is a response from the trade union movement and how it affects workers. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional landowners, elders past, present and emerging, whose land we stand on. Is their land, always will be. Comrades, the first speaker, without any ado, obviously I think very important, the ACTU deliver their first response, and I'd like to introduce Jed Kearney to the mic.
Hey.
Good morning everybody, thank you. Well, we've got a budget that is quite possibly the most dishonest budget that I have ever had the experience of having to listen to and respond to. We've got a government who is trying to pretend, for all intents and purposes, that they've learned the lessons from their past awful budgets, their heinous budgets, the ones that we campaigned so heavily against. They're pretending now all of a sudden that they've listened to us, that they're going to tax the big banks, that they're going to put money into infrastructure, that they're going to do all the good things. But if you look carefully at this budget, every single one of those things is a ruse. There are no new jobs in this budget. There is nothing that is going to help working people have more secure lives. This so-called big infrastructure spend is actually an infrastructure cut. We found out this morning is actually about $7 billion being taken out of infrastructure spending, which means less jobs for working Australians. They're cutting jobs out of the public service. They're cutting awful, awful welfare cuts that will do nothing but increase inequality in this country, a situation that we know is getting worse and worse. This budget gives to Peter by taking from Paul. They will have you think it is a good budget, but this is definitely a case of a leopard not changing its spots. I am asking the people of Australia to look carefully at the response to this. All the good things they're saying they're doing are not good at all. So a $6.2 billion levy on the banks. But you know what? What's still in the budget is a $50 billion tax cut for big business. So that's not going to mean anything to the banks, because down the track they know they're going to get a tax break. They're increasing the Medicare levy. They say to fund the NDIS. We love the NDIS and we love Medicare. But they're taking away the deficit levy from the richest people in our community. So it's not going to affect the rich people. Who is it going to affect? Working Australians. And they wouldn't have had to do this because they could have funded the NDIS simply by not giving big business a $50 billion tax cut. This government has not changed its spots. It wants you to think it has, but it hasn't. This is a dishonest budget. And we are going to make sure the people of Australia, working people, know that they know there's nothing in it for them. Thank you.
Thanks, Jed. I'm sure as the next few weeks unfold, a lot of what you've just said there will really be exposed, and I think there'll be more questions than answers in terms of what's been put forward in this budget. Our next speaker, and one of my favourite politicians, run a great campaign in the last federal election in terms of North Queensland, and right in the heartland, and understands what jobs are to regional communities. I'd like to invite Cathy O'Toole to the mic to say a few words.
Thank you very much. I too would like to pay my respects to the Indigenous owners of this land, elders past, present and future. Coming from North Queensland, and specifically coming from Townsville, where our unemployment rate is over 11%, our youth unemployment rate is approaching 20%, this budget does absolutely nothing for the North. It does nothing for Townsville. It does nothing for the unemployed and underemployed in our community. If you are a millionaire or a multinational, yes, you can sit back, you can put your feet up and you can have a glass of wine or a drink of your choice. But if you are a vulnerable citizen or an unemployed person or a low-income earner, you are in deep trouble. And that is simply not what we would call a fair go for anybody, let alone a fair go for all. The other thing that's really interesting in this budget, no infrastructure for our area at all. Townsville has a water crisis and an electricity crisis. That is no news to anybody, but it is news to Senator Gold Card Ian McDonald because he didn't realise what Townsville needed, and that is why we're probably not getting any money for water or electricity. Those infrastructure projects can develop the Burdekin Falls Dam, can hit two birds with one stone, creating hundreds of jobs for our community, but more importantly, creating apprenticeships and traineeships for our young people who are starved of employment opportunities. We also need to build our apprenticeship base in this country and in our community, and this budget goes nowhere near doing that. And just in finishing, once again, why don't we really kick the most vulnerable in our community, those people on welfare payments? Random drug testing for people who are in the most dire straits of their lives is completely inhumane, and actually I can't see any cost-benefit analysis happening there. And taking the pension away from people who may be in a disability situation because they have been drug dependent is absolutely ludicrous. This shows no understanding at all about what it is to be a human being living in difficult and vulnerable circumstances. I say all power to the unions. United we stand and divided we certainly will fall.
Our next speaker is very fitting in terms of giving an address because Nadine, the National Secretary of the CPSU, obviously represents the biggest unionised workforce that works for government. And you'll hear throughout the course of today, there's another session later on about the various disputes that have been run over this term and the previous term of this federal government. And I think there's no other union that's had to stand up to this government in the face of its ideological stand against workers, its war on workers. And I think Nadine and all of her membership need to be congratulated for the way that they've run their campaigns in terms of getting their issues advocated. And we'd like to welcome Nadine to the mic.
Thank you. Thanks, Comrade. And look, thanks to the MUA for again being prepared to actually lead the charge on bringing the biggest issue for Australian workers, jobs and rights, right here to the steps of Parliament. I reckon there's a few people inside the building who haven't quite got the message yet. We saw some of that last night, but it is great to see us all being here as a movement over the course of this week. This budget does nothing to repair the damage that Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull have done to public services that ordinary working people, their families, students, pensioners, and people when things in their life go wrong rely on from government. They proudly said there have been $7.6 billion worth of cuts to public services since Tony Abbott took office. 7.6 billion. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be that proud of that. And because of that, government has cut 18,000 jobs. 18,000 decent public sector jobs have gone, and the community is suffering. We have seen debacle after debacle. The Bureau of Statistics, census fail, the tax office. It's great they're saying they'll do something about multinationals, except there's 4,500 less people to actually do that work. In fact, a lot of our members who used to go after multinationals for tax avoidance have been offered jobs in the big four accounting firms, helping corporations avoid more tax, because that's the only jobs going. So this government has seemed as 1 million calls to Centrelink, Medicare and child support unanswered last year. What does the government do? Well, we've cut 5,000 jobs, we'll replace them with robots. That's going to work out so well for our community. It's been an absolute debacle. It is awful for people in the community, and it's actually awful for our members. They want to do a decent job and they can't. So what's the government's answer last night? 1,200 more job cuts. 1,200 more job cuts in an agency that is in crisis. We've just been saying it in the Senate inquiry. Robodebt, the place is a disaster. They're going to cut 1,200 more jobs. But to add insult to injury, it's okay, government's got a solution. They've got a pilot privatisation program where they're putting 250 jobs into an unnamed private contractor to deliver human services. It is an absolute disgrace. And I can tell you, I got the first text from a rank and file leader on this at 7:36 last night, and they are still going on Facebook at 1 o'clock this morning. Our members are gutted, they are furious, and yet look, they are up for the fights, but they've been fighting for more than 1,000 days, and they shouldn't have to fight this hard just to provide decent services to our community and to keep their jobs. So I say, this is a budget that we have to fight, and I want to ask my comrades across, not just those here today, but right across our movement, this is the time for us to fight. So what do we do when workers are under attack? Stand up, fight back. What do we do when jobs are under attack?
Stand up, fight back.
What do we do when Malcolm Turnbull's the Prime Minister?
Stand up, fight back.
Yeah, look, that's what we've got to do, and I reckon we're up for it. I think we can knock this mob off.
Thanks, Nadine. I think I got the third question wrong. Everyone else said stand up, fight back. I said kick him out. Our next speaker is another great friend of the Maritime Union and the union movement. And before her political life was a lawyer advocating for workers' rights. Terry Butler, who does a tireless amount of work not only in the Parliament but also in the community up in Queensland. And without any further ado, I'd like to welcome to the mic.
Thanks everyone. I want to share in acknowledging the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri peoples, the traditional owners of this area on which we're meeting today, in this spectacular jobs embassy that you have put together to stand up for working people and for jobs across this country. And I tell you what, it's lucky you're doing that, because Malcolm Turnbull is doing nothing about jobs in this country. Last night, his government delivered a budget that was great for millionaires. It was a budget that was great for multinationals, and it was a budget that was absolutely terrible for everyone else. Not only is there nothing in this budget about jobs, but there's this sort of wild idea that somehow wages growth is going to start increasing and get to 3%. How do they expect that to happen when there is so much casualisation, when there is so much precarious employment, when there's so much contracting, where there's so many redundancies, where there are so many job losses? How do they expect people to have the power to negotiate wage rises? And particularly, how do they expect that to happen when their own government as an employer has been pathetic at negotiating with its own workforce via the CPSU? As Nadine said, 1,000 days of fighting just for enterprise bargaining, because this government is such a hopeless employer as well as being a hopeless government. This is a government that has presided over the lowest, slowest wages growth that this country has seen since we started keeping records on the current figures in 1997. This is a government that cares so little about wages that they are willing to stand by and let the penalty rates of working people get cut. So in July, on the 2nd of July, when the new tax cuts for millionaires start to kick in, when people on $1 million get a tax cut of 16 grand from the government, they get 16 grand extra. At the same time as they want their corporate taxes to start to kick in. At the same time as those things are happening, there will be a tax hike on ordinary families, tax hike on your household, and you'll see the effect of the penalty rates decision, which they are standing by and refusing to do anything about, because they are happy for the take-home pay of working people to be cut in this country. I think that's a disgrace. Bill Shorten thinks that's a disgrace. The Labor caucus here in the Federal Parliament thinks that's a disgrace, and everyone across our great Labor movement across this country thinks that is an absolute disgrace. This is a budget that doesn't deliver for you, it doesn't deliver for your family, it doesn't deliver on jobs, it doesn't deliver on job security, it delivers tax cuts for millionaires and tax hikes for everyone else. And that's why I think this is a budget that's going to see people standing up and saying, we will not put up with a Turnbull government that doesn't stand up for us. We will not put up with a Turnbull government that is so captured by its ridiculous desire to just appease the hard right of its own party, that it's not even going to reverse the freeze on Medicare. We have to see a 3-year ridiculous process to even do anything about Medicare from this government. It's a government that is not going to do anything about the penalty rates cuts. It's a government that is happy to slug you with higher taxes, while at the same time giving millionaires a tax break. It's a government that is prepared to cut education, schools funding by $22 billion right after passing measures to give away $24 billion to corporations in this country. That's the sort of beast we're dealing with here. Don't be under any illusion. This government is a government that will do nothing for you, that will do nothing for your family. The only way that we're going to do anything about this government's willingness to attack us is to, as Nadine said, stand up and fight back. So let's get rid of them. Let's do what we can. Let's work together. We need to fight this budget every day until we get rid of this Turnbull government. Thanks very much, everyone.
I don't know about you, but I'm starting to see a bit of few gaps in the budget already with some of the explanations that are going out. I just want to acknowledge our colleagues from Get Up standing over there. We have to acknowledge them because we wouldn't want to campaign against us. They're very effective in what they do. So all power to you. We love you. Our next speaker is he dodged the bullet yesterday because he had to go to Melbourne, so I've seconded him today. He's our Deputy National Secretary of the Maritime Union, Will Tracy.
Look, thanks, Ian. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and paying respect to their elders, past and present. It's very clear from the budget that we saw last night that this is a political budget designed to save the job or boost the job prospects of one person and one person only, and that's Malcolm Turnbull. And it is designed to provide a defence against the conservative right of his own party, and while the war on workers continues. This is a classic case of smoke and mirrors. We see tax cuts for millionaires, as has been mentioned earlier, while ordinary workers cop a tax increase. We see a government where the biggest line item is still the $15 billion giveaway to corporate Australia. At the same time, in a classic case of smoke and mirrors, they try to hide that by saying they're going to slug the banks, and it is clear that any attempt to increase costs for banks will be passed on to ordinary workers and their families again. A classic case of smoke and mirrors. What we do, we stand here today, and if you have a look around here at the Jobs Embassy we've got, this union and its supporters stand today with the representatives of the hundreds of seafarers that this government has thrown into the cancer of unemployment in the last 2 years. We stand here in support for these Australian seafarers who got thrown out of their workplace because of the deliberate policy decisions of this government. And there is not one item in this budget that seeks to address the concerns that our members have as they struggle through unemployment day in, day out, and the impact that that has on both them and their families. We see a government that has done nothing to address the job insecurity that ordinary Australians are feeling. In fact, the only attempt they've made to address job security in this country and employment security in this country is that of Malcolm Turnbull with the budget that we saw last night. Comrades, it is absolutely critical, and that point's been made by every speaker today, that we fight through to the next election to make sure that this government's turfed out because of what they're doing to ordinary workers in this country as the war on workers continues. Thank you.
Okay, comrades, that concludes the speakers for this session, and in summing up, I think you can see very briefly, there's nothing in it for workers. There's nothing in it for regions. There's nothing in it in terms of shoring up any policies for jobs. There's big cuts for multinational corporations to the tune of $50 billion. But yet workers are going to continue to be casualised, their job security becoming more and more precarious. And as we know in the region of Illawarra, we know what's going on out there. We know in a 2 square kilometre zone, 62 employers are underpaying youth in this country. 62. Now that's a snapshot of 2 kilometres of business in this country. And yet there's nothing here to close that out. Meanwhile, workers are being persecuted by government agencies for standing up for their jobs and the right to work in their own country, a la MV Portland, a la CSL Melbourne, a la a whole host of other areas whereby this government does not give a toss. I think you've seen very, very clearly here today that this government has done nothing but put in a budget that is designed for populism, and it is designed to try and reverse some of the negatives that are going around. And I think over the coming weeks, I think you'll even see the right of the Liberal Party kick this budget to death, because they want to go on with their agenda, they want to go on with their war on workers, and Malcolm Turnbull's trying to put the handbrake on them because Malcolm wants to be liked. That's what this budget is about. Malcolm's saying, please like me, I want to be your Prime Minister. Quite clearly he's failed. Thank you.